WWF Attitude for the Nintendo 64 is probably the worst wrestling game I've ever played. I'd rather play Tag Team Wrestling on the NES, which is also real bad, if it meant that I'd never have to touch WWF Attitude for as long as I lived. But back when Chamba and I were growing up, we played WWF Attitude a lot more than it deserved because we were huge wrestling fans. We'd been introduced to wrestling indirectly by my oldest brother because he had old WWF VHS tapes in his room, and me and Chamba would always sneak in there when no one was around. We had to be extra careful to remember where we'd found the tapes, because one time me and Chamba snuck into his room and he had an awesome Ultraman figure, and even though we were super delicate with it, we moved one of its hands just a couple of inches, and he noticed it immediately once he got home, and he got super angry at us. So we'd watch his old VHS tapes, and we'd always root for the heel wrestlers, the bad guys. We liked guys like Razor Ramon and Big Van Vader, and we hated the good guys, the baby faces. We got way into wrestling after that, and Chamba got WWF Attitude eventually. The game was never any fun, even back then, but we'd try real hard to enjoy ourselves with it, going into create a wrestler mode and messing around with the extremely limited selection of hairstyles, faces, and clothes. Whenever we weren't playing WWF Attitude, we were watching WWF Raw on TV. We couldn't ever watch it together because it aired on Sunday nights, and by that time, Chamba's mom had already come to pick him up from my house. So we'd do the same thing we used to do with Dragon Ball Z. We'd talk with each other over the phone while WWF Raw was playing out every Sunday, and we'd still root for the bad guys like Triple H, The Undertaker, and Kane. We also lucked out because the channel we watched wrestling on would also air every WWF pay-per-view about a month after it had aired in the States. So we got to watch all the awesome WrestleMania pay-per-views for free, and we saw a ton of legendary matches like King of the Ring 1998, The Undertaker versus Mankind in a Hell in a Cell match, which was the match where The Undertaker threw Mankind from the top of the cage onto the Spanish announcer's table, and Mankind just laid there out on the floor almost dead for like 2 minutes. Then Mankind somehow got back up onto the cage, only for The Undertaker to chokeslam him from the top of the cage and into the ring below that was covered with thumbtacks. It was an incredible match, and me and Chamba were speechless throughout all of it. What's weird is that anyone that watched wrestling during the 90s remembers this epic fight, but whenever I talk to other dudes about it, I realize how different my experience was from theirs. During the 90s in the WWF, it was common for wrestlers to slam each other through a table outside of the ring, but it wasn't just any table, it was always the Spanish announcer's table. It was super commonplace, and people came to expect that out of every 4 matches they saw, at least one of them would involve someone being slammed through that table. That's why my experience watching The Undertaker versus Mankind fight was so different, because when The Undertaker threw him off the cage the first time, you can hear the English-speaking announcers, Jerry the King Lawler and Jim Ross, talking about how Mankind has been broken in half, Mankind is dead. It's all about how much pain Mankind must be going through, and what an evil person The Undertaker is for what he's done. To them, the fact that Mankind smashed through the Spanish announcer's table doesn't matter, because that's what always happens in these matches anyways. For me and Chamba watching this match in Spanish, there was an underlying storyline that the English-speaking fans never got to see. For us, it wasn't just the Spanish announcer's table. It was the table where Hugo Savinovich and Carlos Carlitos Cabrera sat at every Sunday. And for several months before the Hell in a Cell match, there'd been a lot of pent-up frustrations for these two guys because wrestlers kept breaking their table every Sunday. The first few times it happened, they were both baffled, and they'd talk about the brutality of what they just saw. But after many months of them getting their table smashed every Sunday without fail, both of them started getting real fed up. So a wrestler would slam through their table and the camera would focus on him laying on the floor in pain, but on commentary you'd hear a frustrated Hugo Savinovich talking about how it's clearly some personal vendetta some higher up from the WWF has against them. The match keeps being filmed, and Carlos Carlitos Cabrera would threaten to quit his job right there on the spot because being put in harm's way every Sunday isn't part of his contract. So knowing all this backstory by the time Mankind was thrown off the cage and he landed on their table, I went through the same shock that the English-speaking audience must have gone through because Mankind was seriously hurt. But at the same time, I was also laughing because this latest destruction of their table had caused the Spanish announcers to reach their breaking point. So they'd be commentating on Mankind's condition, but they'd also periodically check on themselves to see if they'd gotten their faces cut from all the splinters and shards that flew everywhere when Mankind crashed on top of them. Mankind is laying unconscious on the floor, and the commentators wrestlers are using his sprawled out body that's on the floor in front of them as proof that if the WWF doesn't care for one of their star performers, then how could they ever expect to be taken seriously around here? It was some of the most entertaining stuff I've ever seen in my life. So whenever I talk with someone that watched that match and they saw it in English, I can't help but feel that they missed out on some real awesome moments when all that was going down. Chamba and I eventually graduated from WWF Attitude and we got better wrestling games, like the Asmik/Aki developed WCW vs NWO and WWF No Mercy. We got Ultimate Muscle for the GameCube, which was really fun too, and we'd play Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium on a Super Nintendo emulator. But then there came a game that to this day is our favorite wrestling game of all time, WWE Raw 2 for the original Xbox. One of the things that made this game so awesome was how customizable it was. You could transfer MP3s from a burnt disc right into your Xbox hard drive to create custom entrance music for your created wrestlers, and we'd spend countless hours customizing and perfecting each one of our creations. We had around 50 created characters from other video games, from anime. We even put Neo in there and other characters from famous movies. We'd always have a blast with the character creator, but then we stumbled onto the best thing about WWE Raw 2, Season Mode. It had co-op play, so me and Chamba made our own characters for the career mode. My character was El Crazy, which means the crazy one, and Chamba was El Lonely, or the lonely one. El Crazy was pretty much a ripoff of the Undertaker. He had his hair draped over his face, and he wore dark outfits and all that stuff. But I made him a little bit crazier because he was El Crazy. Chamba's character had a karate outfit and a huge beard because he'd trained in the mountains by himself for decades, and thus he came to be known as El Lonely. Season mode was super fun because you got to decide how your wrestler behaved behind the scenes. You could form alliances with people, surprise attack other wrestlers, or even hire someone to be your manager. What we found out was that you could have different looks depending on whether your wrestler was in the ring or if he was backstage interacting with other wrestlers. So me and Chamba created storylines to reflect that. What I did for El Crazy was that in the ring he was dark and mysterious, but backstage he was a pathetic looking dude. His hair wasn't cool and Undertaker-ish, it was short, and he was also really overweight. He wore khaki shorts and black socks, and he wasn't El Crazy at all. My storyline for him was that what people saw in the ring was all smoke and mirrors. It was what the WWE wanted the audience to see. It was makeup, a wig, and a girdle. The real Crazy was this shitty dude that was tired of living a lie, and that's why he'd always surprise attack everyone backstage to take out his pent-up rage on them. El Lonely was a respected karate master in the ring, and he carried himself in a calm and peaceful manner. Backstage, though, Chamba dropped the bombshell that El Lonely's beard was fake, and his guru-like persona was a sham. He had created a cult of personality inside of the ring and had everyone under his control, but outside of the ring, the real Lonely would laugh at how many people he's managed to trick so far. We kept assuming different identities and making up new storylines. We always had ulterior motives for everything that happened inside and outside of the ring, and we must have played WWE Raw 2 for about 4 or 5 months non-stop. We also kept watching wrestling on TV until the channel we watched it on stopped airing WWE Raw and replaced it with a shitty Mexican talk show. And back then there were no sites with streaming video or any other way for us to keep up with what was happening in the WWE. So we eventually got into skateboarding and stopped caring about wrestling. And whenever me and Chamba talk about wrestling nowadays, it's always because another wrestler died of a heart attack or some other tragedy happened. The only thing about wrestling that still gets us amped up is when we reminisce about El Crazy and El Lonely, and we remember such tales as the time all the other wrestlers staged an intervention with El Crazy so that he'd finally face his inner demons and stop hurting everyone backstage. He decided he was sick of living a lie and he went into the ring as his true self, but the crowd hated him for it and told him that they wanted the real El Crazy, not this washed up loser. So after his match, he ended up taking out his rage on a whole bunch of people backstage, where we talk about how El Lonely made a fortune with his all-knowing master persona until he eventually told the crowd that he'd scammed them out of all their money and that he was leaving this rotten business to go retire on an island somewhere. The WWE Raw 2 crowd was shocked and enraged, and we deleted El Lonely from our list of characters. And with that, our obsession with wrestling had come to an end, and we moved on to the next weird chapter of our lives.